Good afternoon, and welcome to our fourth annual Commonwealth Sustainability Week and today's webinar, 2035 Drawdown, Partnerships and Emission Reduction Strategies Needed to Support 2035 Goals. I'm Matt Reese, GreenGov Deputy Director. Today's webinar is co-hosted and supported through our partnership with Penn State Sustainability and our Sustainability Week partner, Dr. Peter Boger, Director for Engagement, who is responsible for developing strategic programming and partnerships, such as this one with the GreenGov Council, that help leverage their resources to promote sustainability throughout the Commonwealth. The GreenGov Council was established as the Commonwealth Agency's Lead by Example program, promoting energy conservation and sustainable governance. Our charter sets forth performance goals for the Commonwealth, ultimately steering the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions within our portfolio. With us today and joining from the Rachel Carson State Office building are Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection Secretary and GreenGov Council Co-Chair, Jessica Shirley, Dr. Brian Regley, Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Critical Investments, Dr. Laura Fowler, Director of Sustainability and Chief Sustainability Officer of Penn State University, and Mark Hand, GreenGov Council Director. Mark will be moderating our conversation today. Take it away, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Matt, for introducing us. I'm Mark Hand, GreenGov Council Director, and happy Sustainability Week. Glad you could all join us. We're here live in the Rachel Carson building with Laura Fowler, Secretary Shirley, and Brian Regley. And I just wanted to thank everyone that's online today who could join us, and also Brian and Peter for helping to monitor the live chat going forward. If you don't know anything about the GreenGov Council, we were started in 2019 under an executive order. And our mission of the GreenGov Council is to encourage environmental sustainability in Commonwealth operations. And so Matt and I work closely with government agencies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, drive down energy costs, switch to clean vehicles, purchase renewable electricity. And so we have a pretty big mission, and we also work to lead by example. So a lot of the items that we work to do in the Commonwealth, we work to also get to local governments and other entities outside of the Commonwealth so that we can transfer that knowledge and institutional knowledge to all of you out there in Pennsylvania. So with that said, this year's sustainability theme is on climate action. And it's important to our mission, and we're specifically looking to showcase climate action from all angles. And whether you're a state employee, local government, county official, whatever your area of influence is, we are in a situation where we have an all hands on deck situation, climate emergency, and we need to sort of get together and start talking about these things. Especially when we have on the heels of Hurricane Helene, which was impacted the Southeast, and we have a lot of work to do. And so climate change is a very big challenge for Pennsylvania and the nation as a whole. And it's really not up to Pennsylvania alone to solve this, but we really need to work together to focus on what we can do. And a statistic I wanted to share from the World Resources Institute reports that the top 10 states in the US are responsible for half of the US emissions. And guess where Pennsylvania is? We are sitting at number 5 behind Texas, California, Florida, and Illinois. So we do have a big role in this. We are not alone. We can't solve this alone, but we have a big role in all of this. So today's conversation around partnerships and emission reduction strategies for 2035 goals is critical, and it's important that we have this conversation today. So again, I want to thank our panelists today for joining, and thank you all for joining as well. And let's just jump right into a question, a little bit of an icebreaker to get things started. I guess we'll start with Lara. How's that? So I just wanted to hear from the panelists about sort of your own introduction of where you come from, and give us a little information about your background and how you got to become Penn State Chief Sustainability Officer. And also, if you have sort of, the audience is kind of broad and all over Pennsylvania, and it'd be really cool if you could share something about what your favorite part of your job coming from Penn State would be.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to be here in person, actually. And also thanks for this series. I think it's a really important time for this conversation. In part, watching what's happened across the Southeast, but also looking at another hurricane barreling down at Florida right now. How do we, in fact, address these things? A little bit about my background. I actually am from the Pacific Northwest. I am fascinated by Pennsylvania, and I'll loop back to that here in a moment. But I started working on water issues when I was in high school. And I think it's actually one of my favorite parts of the job is working with students. And I tell them, not so secretly, they have a superpower of asking questions, of getting involved with things, because that's what I did as a student. I went to college in New Hampshire. I created a made-up degree in water resource management. My official degree is Asian Studies, Japanese. I do speak Japanese, a little rusty right now, but made up a degree in water resource management, moved back to Oregon, worked water policy for a lobby group representing irrigation districts for a little bit, and then shifted gears to work for the state of Oregon doing water policy. And I kept getting tipped into the deep end of projects where there'd been an issue for 20 or 30 years, and they'd say, go fix this. Agricultural water conservation, municipal stream flow, municipal questions, in-stream flow restorations, and often where science meets law, meets policy, meets a lot of questions of trust. And so I started picking up facilitation trainings. Thought that was really interesting. Started to think about going back to school and went to law school, not to be a lawyer, but to be a mediator. Neutral third party helping people find solutions to questions like this. And had the privilege of working for a law firm based out of Seattle and Tacoma, Washington for 8+ years on questions like who gets to store and use groundwater in Los Angeles? How do you fix regional transportation project problems across the Puget Sound, Seattle, Tacoma, et cetera? How do you address flooding in a river basin in Washington state where they've been hit 2 years in a row, basically 18 months apart, by storms that were catastrophic? We moved here in 2012 to Pennsylvania and started over effectively as an adjunct professor teaching water law, energy law, negotiation and mediation, and then helping facilitate interdisciplinary research related to energy and water. So had that job for 10 years, that dual appointment, and then 2 years ago became Penn State's Chief Sustainability Officer, where the role really is how do you help think about education our students might need, think about our operations, how do we do better ourselves, think about the land grant mission and what's that mean as a partner across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and how do we knit all of that together. So again, favorite part really is working with students and helping them find their voice, their questions, and really challenging maybe the status quo of, well, this is the way we've always done things. The way we've always done things has gotten us where we are now. How do we do something different? So
that's awesome. Yeah, we're so glad to have you in Pennsylvania for sure. Yeah. Go down the line, Secretary Shirley.
I wish I would have went first. I sound really boring. I'm Jessica Shirley. I'm the acting secretary for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. I've been at DEP since 2011, and I've been in this role for about a year. I started here after a short stint at the Department of Labor and Industry, and really wanted to work on oil and gas issues. So that's really one of the things where or one of the spaces that I cut my teeth was working with oil and gas and climate change. Those were my two main topics whenever I was an executive policy specialist. And then I worked my way up. I was the policy director for about 6 years, which I believe I'm still the longest serving policy director at DEP. And then I got into this space of infrastructure coordination, which is what Brian's going to talk about in a little bit. But, we had a ton of federal dollars coming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and then the Inflation Reduction Act. And we needed somebody to kind of pull those all together. And that was really fun. It was a short stint because then I got tapped to be the executive deputy at the beginning of the Shapiro administration. And then about a year ago, I was asked if I would serve as the acting secretary. So, my training through policy really gave me a broad view of the Department of environmental issues, of the issues that are affecting Pennsylvanians. Certainly on the national scale, the issues are similar, but also very unique to each state. And it's been interesting to see that. But my role here is to represent Pennsylvania, represent the department, and figure out creative solutions to a lot of new issues. We still have a lot of old issues, legacy issues, but as we transition into 2025 and start thinking about 2050, there are a ton of new issues with climate change and environmental justice that we need to address. The favorite part of my job is really just interacting with staff, being able to see their accomplishments, being able to brag about their accomplishments, represent them, and learn about what motivates them. Why are we public servants? Why are we environmental professionals? And we have this thing in common, and just working towards the greater good. It's the thing that keeps me driving into the office every day. So.
Executive Director Brian Redley.
So everything I've learned about being an infrastructure coordinator, I learned from the secretary. So I have the privilege of working in the interstitial spaces of government. And it is the greatest pleasure to have folks like Secretary Shirley and others to work with. But I think the design of the job that the governor gave me was to look at how not just the federal dollars that come in through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, how those impact individual programs, but also to look across programs to be able to determine that funding that comes to one area of the government could affect another area of the government, and coordinating programs could add value. It's the force multiplier language to be able to say money here plus local coordination equals climate action, equals the kinds of sustainability activities that Laura has talked about in her life and her career. And the one point I would make about where we stand today is it's not just, sort of repeating the same things over and over again. I mean, to a certain degree, a lot of the low-hanging fruit in sustainability has already been yielded with smart investments that have occurred in the last 15, 20 years. But a lot of the problems that are now emerging and will become more and more urgent as we see climate change occur will require cross-functional thinking and the ability to change how we are describing the problems that we face. It's not as simple as saying, hey, look, we can just build a bunch of solar panels here and a couple wind turbines here and all the problems are solved. The interdependencies of these systems are really, really crucial. So the jobs that are needed in government and outside of government are ones that can lean into various disciplines. I have the advantage of many years in the private sector and many years building buildings as part of a development company. So I know something about how construction financing works. I was the CEO of a software company. I know something about how to develop software and how to manage the interdependency of relationships within those kinds of technical environments. But ultimately, none of the specific pieces of knowledge that I bring from my previous career is worth anything without specialists like what we have in the Department of Environmental Protection, working with the specialists at our Department of Community and Natural Resources and the specialists that are at the federal level working on all these issues, coordinating policies so that we can actually achieve reasonable outcomes from the funding that we've gotten from the federal governments. So ultimately, the discussion I'm hoping we're going to have today is about how implementation happens, not just for 2035, but also for the subsequent years, and ultimately how you can all participate in those conversations, because in the end of the day, it's not just about the 4 people sitting on this dais, it's about all of you and the people that you're working with, coordinating activities and finding pathways for social, energy, and economic value so that we can make this world more sustainable.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, we will definitely jump into those points here in a minute. For those online, if you have questions for this panel, please do drop it in the chat. I guess as a follow-up question and just one more personal question is I just wanted to see, as you hold these positions that are, very public and out there, what is everyone has concerns about climate change. What is your most pressing concern, either personally or professionally? And Brian, you started to answer it. Maybe we can start with you.
Can I ask us? Let's actually be optimistic, right?
Okay.
Yeah, there's reasons for concern. Let's be optimistic.
Okay.
We have a law in the Inflation Reduction Act that opens such a broad scope of potential activity to support investments and capital formation that are truly transformative in the area of energy policy and climate investment. We have a tremendous number of resources that are available to help with resiliency and to be able to help local communities manage water issues and stormwater issues. We have, I think, an increasingly broad recognition of the fact that we can't do things the way we did it before, and that was part of what Laura just said. You know, you can't just simply lean into yesterday's answers for problems that were emerging yesterday. You got to think about the future that we have and what are the problems that are beginning to emerge. So I'm extraordinarily optimistic in the innovation that comes from the American experience, the global experience, and I believe that the economic energy that the Biden administration has put behind that can yield all kinds of fascinating results. My biggest concern is we don't take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us, either because the politics are so fraught that we refuse to collaborate, or that local communities and local capacity doesn't emerge to actually absorb these capabilities and translate them to useful opportunities in the local sphere, because everything needs to happen in the local sphere. But I'm much more optimistic than concerned relative to the capabilities we have in front of us.
Excellent. And yeah, thank you for being.
Now, do you guys share that optimism, or am I kind of speaking too far out of school?
Go ahead. I am both concerned and share the optimism.
Okay.
So concerned at the rate that we're seeing, again, you know, watching the impacts of Hurricane Helene and the addition, people talk about natural disasters. Those in the natural disaster world say they're not natural at all, right? It's a combination of decisions made over a lot of years of building codes. You know, whoever thought building codes were sexy, right? But how do you make decisions that say, let's build, in fact, for resilience? What does that look like? And I think one of the challenges is our system of local government here in Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of PA. We have one of the richest, fantastic system of local government. And if I am water, I don't care, right? I don't care what your boundary is between a borough, a township, a municipality, right? Or a county. And I don't care if you call it stormwater or floodwater. It's a matter of degree, yet we have laws that are separate for that. I think the opportunity that I'm seeing is actually in some different areas other than climate, but also in climate. So for example, we were talking before we got started about the efforts that Pennsylvania is making at addressing water quality questions by focusing at a county level. And you're starting to see news stories of, it's gone in the 12 years that I've lived in Pennsylvania, from Pennsylvania's the worst and we're not doing anything to we are in fact leading from the bottom up, county level, but even local action to find activity. So something like the Lancaster Clean Water Partners and Allison Gibson and the folks down there are doing extraordinary things to address water quality. Can we take that template of thinking not only about projects and funding, but the process of bringing along communities in that local resilience? How do you multi-solve? Because we can't do one problem at a time. We don't have enough time to speed and scale this up. And I think those local bottom-up solutions are actually emerging in a lot of places in Pennsylvania. And I'm curious, Secretary, what else you would say on that?
Yeah, I should have brought a pen so I could write down all my.
It's recorded. You don't have to write back. You can just listen to it again.
No, I just need to write down all my thoughts. You know, I think you're spot on with that because it's not it's an all of the above type of situation. So at DEP, you know, we are a regulatory agency. We issue permits, we do enforcement, we look at compliance, but we have to adapt, and those things have to adapt. And we are getting hit with, you know, multiple scenarios due to climate change. So we might be dealing with drought one day in one area, and then, you know, 3 months from now we might be dealing with flooding. And it's just the swings of different things that we have to deal with, in addition to things like ticks and West Nile virus or you know, Lyme disease. So the magnitude of the things that we have to address and be prepared for is huge at the state level. And I think local partners are where the rubber really meets the road. And in Pennsylvania, you have local partners who range from, you know, first-class cities who are pretty adept at being able to deliver services and address some of these issues, to some very small rural municipalities who don't even have full-time staff. And, you know, being able to scale the various programs to kind of reach everybody, because climate change knows no borders, flooding knows no borders, drought knows no borders. And being able to deliver these things fairly, I think is a challenge that I'm thinking about all the time, and that we're working for at DEP.
So the good news, you know, the extent to which the federal funds are involved in any of these conversations is that many of those programs are designed to break down barriers, right? They're designed to break down geographies. And, you know, the challenge, to your point, is how do we help build local capacity, but also how do we build state capacity? I know you as secretary have been trying to argue for more staffing and resources to do more permitting, which is crucial. And you're right, all of the types of permitting and challenges that we're going to have to solve, they're going to change because the climate changes, the requirements are going to change, you know, things that we have never seen before are going to emerge. But at the same time, we also have these additional transformative opportunities to help not just mitigate, but also get ahead of those challenges and to create new energy sources, for instance, to create, you know, new types of governance structures that will allow us to respond more flexibly to the kinds of challenges that we're beginning to see emerge. So I would say, you know, question back to you, Laura, as you look at the history of United States energy policy and government as a lawyer, right? What are some of the models that you have found that have been most successful? You mentioned Lancaster, which is, I think, a great example. Are there other types of models that you would look at and say, yeah, these are the kinds of people and this is the kinds of organization that could really readily absorb the capacity that we're trying to get out into the world for climate change reduction and mitigation?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think it's partly my experience of working you know, in California, Oregon, and Washington, you know, as that neutral third party helping people find solutions to things. I often think actually about how do we cut not the red tape, but the green tape, right? You know, you're looking for accountability and you're looking for how do we make this easier? So Washington State, for example, has an energy facility siting office where I, as somebody walking in, don't have to figure out which 14 agencies to go in. I walk in one door and they've helped do the work behind the scenes. So that's one example. Different example, Oregon in the late 1990s was looking at having a number of fish species, salmon and steelhead, listed under the Endangered Species Act. And then Governor John Kitzhaber said, wait a second, our agencies are very siloed. How do we bridge those? We're not going to create, you know, a mandate on how to do this, but how do we help work together? And so there's been almost 30 years of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board bringing funding in to help again with process for bottom-up watershed councils. And those councils then bring together nonprofits, local government, state and federal agencies, anybody who's interested to say, well, what are the problems we're trying to solve? How do we build more resilience in these systems? And then how do we start to leverage resources? And so having had the privilege of working with a lot of those river basins for a lot of years and then still following it, you're seeing a tremendous amount of success. Have they fixed all the problems? No. But are they much better off than they would have been 20 or 30 years ago? Absolutely. And it's often that unsung work. I often look for, too, how do we amplify the success stories? Because often the press will lead, you know, if it leads, it leads, right? If it's bad news, that's what's in the press. There is such amazing work happening in Pennsylvania that I think there's, how do we collectively help even amplify what's happening here and now?
So now I'm going to ask Mark a question because I've hijacked the session.
No, this is great.
Green Gov is a version of this, right? It's a version that was created under the Wolf administration. Obviously, the Shapiro administration is continuing it and continuing your work and very excited about it. How do you think Green Gov changes, if I can ask that question, relative to what Laura just said about governance and new responsibilities and things like that?
Well, I mean, we have to be flexible, and then we need to expand our scope to be able to take on, you know, the opportunities to help, you know, communities and outside of state government. You know, my concern with all of this is we really need systematic change taking place, and we need to sort of, you know, get that in place so that state and local governments can adopt that over time. So. I don't know.
No, that does answer my question. But here's something that I would throw at you and anybody else. It's simply because I like talking about tax credits. I can't have a session without talking about tax credits for at least a couple of seconds. So for those who do not remember or do not know, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act provides for a direct pay mechanism under the act. a not-for-profit or a government or an instrumentality of government can obtain the same financial benefits as a for-profit company and can receive a check directly from the U.S. Department of Treasury for making similar sorts of investments. So Mark and I have just filed the first Commonwealth of Pennsylvania tax forms for our 990T that will obtain via reimbursement about $1 million for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 4 solar arrays built by the Department of Community and Natural Resources, 37 vehicles that were purchased by PennDOT and the police departments, and I think 7 fueling stations, if my memory serves. And all of these, again, are part of the exercise of creating institutional change. You're building a new muscle, a new capacity. I don't think Mark would have heard of tax credits 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago.
No.
This is the joke about green gov now being green gov. It's about money. It's not just about sustainability, right? So if you can create mechanisms and hooks that allow institutions to find new financial value, the missions evolve, right? It's not just what it was created to do. It's also the reinvention of that mission over time. It's the reinvention of DEP. It's the reinvention of all of these water districts. And so how do you create opportunities to change the mission but maintain the DNA of the organization so it remains in alignment and can still focus on the challenges of climate change? So now that I've taken you off your list of questions, do you want to get back to your list of questions to go to the next one?
And I completely agree. I mean, we need to, help, financing is a big tool that's out there, and we need to help, work that through with other entities. But
can I say something about
yes.
financing? So we're actually part of, there's an Appalachian Regional Council grant to look at the energy transition and the financing needs for that. There's a planning grant underway right now. Still Valley Authority out of the Pittsburgh area is the lead of that. But we're looking for partners and really thinking about, it's one thing to say address climate change or decarbonize, but it's kind of overwhelming and scary, right? But if you say, okay, well, what sectors, how do we do it? Who needs to transition? How do we break it into pieces? Recently saw a graphic that, you can start here and try and get there and it looks paralyzing, but what are the interim steps to break it down? So we had a really fascinating conversation last week with Dr. Mike Boninger, who's the head of sustainability for UPMC and Pitt College of Medicine. Again, thinking about the healthcare sector. Who knew, but a big emitter of greenhouse gases is anesthetic gases. Turns out laughing gas is incredibly potent as a greenhouse gas, for example. It's run through pipes. He was saying that something like 90% of that leaks. Very little of it makes it to the patient. And oh, by the way, clinical studies have shown it's maybe not that effective as an anesthetic. So can you shift out, shut those systems down, shift to you've got a canister if you really need it, but start to think about that. And so we're trying to say, is there an opportunity for a coalition in the healthcare space to think about sustainability and decarbonization? Because the hospitals and the healthcare systems need to keep the lights on, need to address their pretty heavy duty resource intensity. But how do we build a coalition of something like that? So again, live discussion, but it's not financing in general. It may be the Huntington Fire District wants to put solar, so do 25 other fire districts. Can we do it at scale to speed this up?
And that sounds like a great segue to have Jessica Shirley talk about the DEP's new great program, Rise Pennsylvania, $400 million of funding for DEP to help do decarbonization.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought this up.
We didn't plan for that.
So the RISE PA program stands for Reducing Industrial Sector Emissions in Pennsylvania. Most folks, maybe most of the folks on this call are aware, but a lot of folks don't even think about it. But industrial sector emissions are actually the largest sector of emissions in Pennsylvania. And it makes sense because we make things here. We make a lot of things here. We make steel, we make asphalt, we have quarries, we have mines, we have oil and gas development. These things have emissions. And we received this funding, almost $400 million from the Inflation Reduction Act of the Biden administration, excuse me, to focus on those industrial sector emissions. So right now we are in the process of developing those grant guidelines, but we'll really be working with folks in the labor community and in the industrial sector to find some of these entities that want to be better neighbors and reduce not only greenhouse gas emissions, but also reduce other emissions that have health impacts on the people that live there. So we're really excited about it. It's not lost on us that Pennsylvania is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, and we think that we can also be the birthplace of industrial decarbonization. With that, I will say $400 million is not nearly enough to fully decarbonize the industrial sector. But what it is it's seed money. It's proof of concept money to show that with some investment, it is possible to reduce emissions. And I think most of these companies want to reduce emissions, not just to reduce emissions, but a lot of times it also saves money, especially if they're switching out fuel sources. They can opt for cleaner versions that maybe have lower costs. And then they can take that money and reinvest into some other parts of their business. So it's something that we're really excited. We're just getting off the ground, and we think it'll be open at the beginning of the new year.
And the point that the Secretary made at the end is a really, really crucial one. Many of these investments can reduce the cost of operation for the entities that implement them. And this is where the discussion around decarbonization and clean jobs sometimes fails. The Democrats, speaking as a Democrat, doesn't do it as well as they should. When we're talking about decarbonization, obviously it's important that we focus on the benefits for the climate. But for business owners that have to put their cash at risk and don't necessarily see the return, the goal is to create templates that not only demonstrate the return, but also the exigency of making the investments, which is why programs like RISE PA and the tax credits that I talked about before are all about that capital formation. It's all about helping people to say yes to something, right? And if you do the thing, you get the benefits, and the benefits ultimately accrue not just to your business, but also to the community as a whole. So every single one of these programs that have been rolled out here at the state level that are going to require your assistance for the implementation at the local level are not only focused on that decarbonization goal, but they should also be focused on the economic vitality of those who work the projects. And it's sometimes hard for us to remember that, because in a world where we're focused on sustainability for all the right reasons, sometimes we forget that people make different decisions for motivations that are very different than our own. And we end up, sometimes I do it well, right? I got a PhD. I talk about this all the time. I get very, very arrogant. And sometimes I think somebody actually understands the thing I'm talking about because it's self-evident to them. The frameworks are different. It's hard to somehow recognize the fact that a business owner making a decision is their own personal risk. And part of that goal in government is to find those partnerships so that we can help them de-risk these investments that they need to make. So in all of these cases, I would encourage all of you to not just think about the exigencies of sustainability, but also think about the business dynamics and the capital formation, because our ability to communicate that jointly through sessions like this and others is really why Green Gov is not just about sustainability. It's also about the money, and how we get the money and the sustainability to work together is really essential.
So, yeah, so we've been talking about plans and resources. We naturally pivoted to that. And I just wanted to see if there's if we wanted to talk about any other sort of plans and resources, either at the college level or statewide, that, something to share with the audience here going forward that is folks that should know about online.
Yeah, let me add on the Penn State side. I think it's a really, really interesting example of what Brian was just talking about, and I think the Secretary was alluding to, right? So Penn State, there's just an article that came out last week discussing the fact that Penn State has managed to decarbonize our greenhouse gas emissions 50% over 2005 baseline levels, even as we have built more buildings, right? We have decoupled additional building through a lot of effort with energy efficiency. And I should have said this at the outfront. One of the things that's really an amazing opportunity is in fact to work with staff all across the university who are thinking very actively about things like energy efficiency, fleet transformation. How do we run our operations better? Think about something like a university. Penn State has 89,000 students. We have 24 campuses. We have 37,000 employees. And for the main University Park campus, right, that is, we own basically our own utilities, water, energy, sewer. And so it's an interesting place to learn by doing an experiment. And so it's been really interesting, I think, to think about what's it take to, in fact, to move towards decarbonizing the university. Carbon Emission Reductions Task Force worked a couple years ago to say it is in fact possible to get there by 2035 by taking a whole suite of actions. We've developed 11 different climate action teams, including a finance action team, to figure out how do we create a portfolio of different revenue sources to match what we need to do. Our scope 1 emissions are those that we generate ourselves, and the university has invested literally millions of dollars in something like combined heat and power. If you look nationally at energy use, all the energy we actually produce by burning coal or natural gas or solar or anything else, 62% of that is what's called rejected energy. Let me translate it. We don't use it to do any work. It is lost because of inefficiencies. So how do you capture more of that energy? And so we have 2 combined heat and power systems that are pretty darn efficient. We took out our coal burning power plant in 2016. We had 50 or 60 coal trucks every morning delivering coal. And in one of those moments, right, I was visiting the West Campus steam plant with our steam plant operator, wearing a hard hat in the steam plant. Somebody came out and he's like, yeah, you shouldn't stand right there. The plant's been doing something a little funny today. We moved 10 seconds later, it drops a bunch of coal right where we were, right? So it's just a moment in time where you're like, oh, this system really, really well. But we've transferred to burning natural gas, improve the efficiencies of our systems. But a lot of what we're looking to do, so for example, transferring from steam to hot water, we could duct tape our system together for a lot of years, or it's an initial very high upfront cost. How do we do that? And so those are some of the things we're really working with right now. I mentioned education as a piece of it, though, and the capacity questions across Pennsylvania. We have a program that DEP started and ran for a number of years and then transferred to the university, but the local climate action program that matches students and classes with community needs. So we have students will take a class for 2 terms, work with the community to do the greenhouse gas emissions calculation, and then help them develop climate action plan. This past year, actually, a group of students worked with the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources in a really challenging project to figure out what are the emissions of all of our state parks, which have their own wastewater systems. A student who knew nothing about wastewater treatment suddenly is like, I have found my passion. I had no idea that what I loved.
Sign them up for DEP because I think Jess.
We need them. Right? And so it's a way to introduce those students to real world questions, working with clients and building that capacity. So we're trying to figure out how do we scale that program up? Because 6 communities, 12 communities at a time, again, not fast enough. So opportunities for thinking about our own operations, meeting that land grant mission, and building in that education at real scale.
And we can keep going with this conversation, and maybe Matt or Peter, I saw some questions that came in on the chat, and this is a great opportunity for folks to ask some questions. Peter or Matt, is there any sort of questions in the chat that you want to share?
Yeah, hi. So one question we had was congratulations to the state on starting the Solar for Schools program, and asking, is there an opportunity to start a similar program for local municipalities where there's often like a limit in staff and budget, even with the 30% federal credit?
Look, absolutely. The answer to that is absolutely. Within the Department of Environmental Protection, there is a Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority, which Secretary Shirley is the chair of. It is designated as the State Energy Financing Institution, the SEFI, by the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office. They have $413 billion of loan capacity that they're trying to lean into. We have discussed with them not only Solar for Schools in terms of bringing additional financing to the $25 million that the legislature approved last year for the rollout of that program, but to also use that as a leverage point for projects at the municipal level, even within conservation districts and the like that want to begin to make clean energy investments. The opportunity there is to finance the tax credits, because again, the eligibility of those tax credits to all of those institutions creates an equity down payment that already exists if the financing structures are right and appropriate for that. So we continue to work with the board of the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority to advance proposals in that area. And the goal would be to do something very, very similar in 2025 and 2026. And the extent to which we can get seed money from our friends in the legislature, that's great. But the best thing about these kinds of climate investments right now is that they are actually financially self-sustaining just with the tax credits. Think of it this way. Under the Inflation Reduction Act's investment tax credits, you can receive 30% of the value back of the investment that you make as long as you use prevailing wage. 40% if you have domestically manufactured materials, and another 50%, meaning stacking 30, 10, and 10, if you're in an energy community that covers about 65, 70% of our Commonwealth right now. If you buy a house, they ask you for 20% down, right? It's almost like you're buying the house. You already have the 20% in the tax credit, but you have to buy the house in order to get the tax credit. So the good news is we should be able to finance 100% of the thing because you're going to get 30, 40, 50% of it back, and that's going to be the equity you need to build the thing. How do you do that? You create within the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority or other institutions the financing mechanism that allow you to get 100% of the value of the thing, and then over time obtain that tax credit and use it as the equity contribution for the thing you need to build. It's literally a license to print money for anybody who's willing to make investments in places like Altoona and Johnstown and Williamsport and any place else you can imagine in Pennsylvania. That's the goal of my organization, is to help promote those kinds of structures, and God willing, the secretary will be able to write some of those checks someday.
I'd love to. Also, we did recently kick off through the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority what we've called the MORE program, which stands for Municipal Opportunities and Retrofits for Efficiency. I don't know.
Very well done.
But it's specifically, it's not solar for schools type, but it is looking, it's targeting municipal governments for energy efficiency projects. You should definitely check that out.
Okay, any other questions through the chat?
And I will also just quickly put in a plug to build on those answers. If it sounds like you can print money, but if capacity is the issue, you should definitely check out our Thursday webinar this week, where we'll be talking about the Appalachian Regional Finance Hubs that are designed to help provide municipalities with access to the materials and the templates to figure out how to move forward when they are strapped for personnel and people and knowledge on how to go after these opportunities. The second question that we have in the chat right now is a question about thanking us for the conversation on the local level, but being worried about making sure that Pennsylvania is keeping our low and moderate income families involved and engaged through this transition so they aren't left out. So wondering if there's a conversation about these kind of questions of equity and justice and how we make sure we're serving all the communities as we transition into this new resilient future.
Let me take a stab at that. Just heard a presentation 2 weeks ago that made my blood run cold of something like 1 in 4 Pennsylvanians are energy insecure. And often what you see is if you can't pay your energy bill, you can't pay your water bill, you're also more likely to become unhoused. And so that security question, I think, is very, very real. Just recently was visiting Hazleton, and I was struck in going through the community of Hazleton how few trees there were. Older buildings, really, it was quite a hot, it was late season and very, very warm. You know, no places that weren't pavement for kids to play on, and thought, wow, this is really an energy injustice question, right? So part of it is, you know, there's a lot of discussion right now about offsets. Do you buy, you know, a piece of a rainforest in the Amazon to offset your travel, for example? And I wonder if there isn't a pretty robust discussion to be had about insets. Mm-hmm. You're seeing a lot of international, global, national capital trying to find a place to be. Can we quantify energy efficiency retrofits for low-income communities so that you are paying less for energy? Can we make sure that there is community solar, not quite possible yet in Pennsylvania, but it's been done well in other states, to make sure that a low-income community is able to tap into community benefits from something like solar? Talking with a colleague at work who was like, I'd love to buy an electric vehicle, I just can't afford the upfront costs. So are there ways to proactively think about it? And we've talked about schools. One of my favorite examples is starting to think about, you know, how do you retrofit, for example, a school playground to be pervious pavement, absorb water, plant trees, create opportunities for studying, but also dealing with the urban heat island effect, which is pretty severe. Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, I was talking with a pastor from one of our bigger cities who was like, I'm planting trees. Is that a sustainability question? Yes, absolutely, right? If you can address the heat effects through trees, multi-solving again, you can actually decrease violence in a community. So how do we think about, again, stacking those benefits, multi-solving to address the community concerns? We've been looking at the environmental justice definitions, and there's a bunch of different ones, been mapping them. I know the DP has been mapping them. There's, you know, how do you layer that? But that's where I think communities can really say, hey, how do we do this differently? Who is impacted? How are they impacted? Because our most vulnerable are the least able to actually deal with these questions. A couple of years ago was a discussion about floods in the Boulder area, and they were talking about trying to get people out as the floods were coming up and there wasn't enough warning. And they were in an area where there was a lot of immigrant families who would not answer their door at night. Who's going to not answer a door at night, right? But they were the ones who lost everything. The most vulnerable, the least able to deal is some of the, so how do you actually address who is impacted? How do you address it in ways that make a difference at all scales?
I'll just add, I think this question was contemplated by the Inflation Reduction Act through a variety of programs. And I know it's something that the Biden administration has really done a lot of thinking about. There is no kind of one size fits all answer, but they do have the Justice 40 initiative for federal dollars. And there are certain programs that are means tested. So, I would not be able to access these programs based on the amount of money that I make, but I shouldn't. It's really, they're geared towards those folks who really do need the assistance, like the, what do you call it, homes program in here, program where folks can get, switch out their less efficient stoves, and they can have their whole house rewired based on the area median income. So it's not even based on the federal poverty level, which a lot of things are tested off of the federal poverty level. But it depending on where you live, the federal poverty level might be significantly lower than where you are in the income bracket. So it's based on the area median income, which I thought was really smart. And the Solar for All program, which is geared specifically towards low and moderate income folks to be able to access these programs. I think we do have a problem in this country where you have to have something to get something. In a lot of cases, you have to have a match, or you have to have something to be able to get those additional benefits. And what we've seen, at least out of the Biden administration and the IIJA and the IRA, is that they are starting to contemplate creating programs specifically targeting those folks who are going to be most impacted.
Okay, so I'm looking at the time, and we have plenty of time, but I think we have time for one more question, if that's all right with our panelists.
Sure.
And then I want to give you a chance to have final thoughts, however you want to finish. So Peter or Matt, is there another question in the chat?
Yeah, there's one that's gotten a lot of likes here, and I think is a great question. So we have a question from a student who is one of the students at one of our PASSY universities, pointing out that these public universities are often in lower resourced communities that are at great risk for climate change, and yet have great, tremendous energy in faculty and students. And while she was saluting what Penn State has done, is curious to hear, is there other ways that the state is working to try to get the PASSY schools more involved in all these kinds of questions?
So I've had the privilege of talking to a number of the PASSY administrators about the tax credits and sustainability programs. The Budget Secretary Ori Monson has directed the Budget Office to return to any of the agencies or instrumentalities of government that make climate investments the tax credits that they would have obtained. So it's not like, hey, a PASSY school makes a investment in $1 million solar array, and all of a sudden the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 of the ITC goes back to the general fund. The idea is for the PASSY school to receive that tax credit in the subsequent year and allow them to recycle it in a way that would then create future investments. What we need to see, and what you as a student and what I as a member of the administration needs to push, is to ask those schools to accelerate those investments, to recognize the fact that maybe they have something on their schedule for 2026, 2027, 2028 as sort of a might do thing, and to turn that into a 2025, let's do it now thing, because you can do it now and get the funding from the tax credits that will then allow you to have the funding to do it again in 2026, 2027, 2028. That's a little bit hard, and it does require social energy that students and others can provide. This is also true for geothermal. This is also true for cars, for electric vehicles, for charging stations. All of these are eligible expenses. So when we, from the budget office perspective, that's one of the other assignments I have, is I get to work in the budget office, which is part of the joy of this, right? You get to actually see the money move. Hopefully that message is heard. If your administrators have not heard that message, I would invite them to email me at bwrigley@pa.gov, and I will be happy to deliver that message personally on behalf of the governor.
Excellent. And so I guess we're into the final pieces of this. So thanks everyone for participating. I guess, everyone, we have Sustainability Week. We have 4 more days of webinars and nice events. Just wanted to see if our panelists wanted to leave our audience with any sort of final comments of how, final thoughts or comments of how they can take action at the local level or wherever they sit going forward. Just give them some advice, optimism as going forward. Does anyone want to take that?
I'll go first, and we'll send it back this way on the way out, right? It's not about, the problem is not the money. The problem is the capacity to do the thing. And this is the only time in my career, I'm in my late 50s, and I will eventually, wither off this mortal coil. And hopefully many of the young people listening to this documentary and whatever event will go back and say, my God, yeah, this is the opportunity. This was the time where the funds were available to do the thing that needs to be done, right? But in the end, you need people who are doing it. You can't just talk about it. You can't just think about it. You have to actually build the thing. And quite often, I would remind people, the folks who are building the thing are not the people who are voting for the same candidates that you're voting for. Quite often, the people who are building the things are electricians and are construction workers and others who are in the trades who may have different opinions as to the viability or reasonability of the thing that's being built. But I will say they all have the pride to build the thing, and they want to build it right, and they want to build it well. So how do you work with your local communities to find the right partners to construct the things, to plan the things, to put the stamp on the plan that will get the building permit done, that will get the watershed people to send the stormwater permit to her and her team to actually do the thing? It's hard. It's really hard. And the low-hanging fruit of sustainability is largely gone. Saving 62% of the lost energy, like Laura Fowler just said, is really, really hard work. Executing these programs at DEP is really, really hard work. So I ask you all to invest in it and not look at it from the perspective of, oh my gosh, if there was only money for this thing. There is probably money for the thing that we need to do in sustainability. There needs to be faster movement. There needs to be more actual implementation rather than talking. And that's the thing I would ask you to think about over the next couple of days. How do we do something, not just talk about it?
Now I have nothing to say. No, I would just, when it comes to climate change and sustainability, it's hard not to get a little depressed about it and to get weighed down by the magnitude of it. When I first started at DEP, I was a lowly executive policy specialist, and we put out a climate impacts report in 2008 and have to update it every 3 years. And the original projection timeline for those impacts was 2030. And at the time, you're like, wow, 2030 is so far away. We have so much time. But what the impacts that we projected that were going to happen in 2030 are happening today, and they've been happening, for the last several years. So it's really hard for me sometimes not to say I told you so, or we told you so. But now we're starting to talk about 2050, and because we're approaching 2030. It's only 5 years away. So when we're talking about 2050. Don't think that it's really far away and it's really far off, because it's not. It comes really fast. And, as my agency is constantly, adapting and addressing new environmental issues, we're still dealing with a lot of the same ones that we've been dealing with. So as I've challenged my agency to think about DEP 2050 and what does DEP 2050 look like, and solving some of these problems today so that, the leaders in this agency, the up and coming leaders of this agency, aren't dealing with the same things that we've been dealing with. And I don't have all of the answers on that. I don't think anybody does, because we have to constantly adapt to the challenges that are before us. But being flexible, thinking outside the box, being creative, creating that culture of excellence and continuous improvement is really what I'm striving to do at the department right now.
Thank you. What are last words?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I was scribbling notes down as you're talking. Earlier you said that Pennsylvania is basically the 5th largest emitter in the United States. And Brian mentioned earlier sort of that industrial revolution. I've been slowly reading the history of Pennsylvania. And I got to a section about how hard this energy transition was and how reluctant folks were to adopt it. And it was from burning wood to coal. And I don't remember kind of the decade that was, but we have done a lot of energy transitions over time. And last year I was traveling internationally and I was sitting and listening to a discussion about water diplomacy globally. And there was a lot of finger pointing. And my reaction was, I don't know how to fix this, but what we can do is make a difference in Pennsylvania. There's a psychologist, Renee Laertzman, who talks about how do you turn your anxiety into action? And you can, I think, get very stuck. This year for Penn State Sustainability, our theme is really focused on mindfulness, recognizing that this is a concern and saying, what can we do to make a difference? So I often think about it at an individual scale, a community scale, a regional scale, national scale, into the global scale. I don't know how to fix climate change globally. But when we think about community capacity building, all of the big projects I've ever worked on have usually started with a couple people saying, hey, can we go get a cup of coffee and talk about how to do something different? It is that local coalition building of bringing people together to say, let's do something else. What you're seeing in the disaster of the Southeast right now is a lot of mutual aid. There will never be enough government to solve the questions we have, but how do you build those partnerships to say, how are we prepared? We will get hit. I work in flooding, right? Pennsylvania is one of the most flood-prone states in the country. We're going to get hit with disastrous floods. What do we do to prepare now within the communities we're in? How do we make our communities more resilient for what's coming? How do we address who is vulnerable? Be it our school kids or the incarcerated population that is in a prison that has no air conditioning. Pick your passion, work to build a coalition, and maybe that coalition is just asking questions. I can't do my job as Chief Sustainability Officer if the students aren't also pushing the university. And they don't need to know the answers. I just need you to raise your voices and ask, what are we doing about X, Y, and Z? To your local officials, to your school boards. Pick your place, build a coalition, think about what you can do. Food is an interesting one. The food you buy, eat it, right? Is actually a sustainability and a climate action. 30 to 40% of our food is wasted. So something small, and then work with others to share those ideas. Kind of, can you adopt one thing that you are doing differently? Ride a bike one day that I wasn't otherwise, and then advocate for better bike infrastructure. And one of the things I'm really thinking about right now, there's a book that was just published in September by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson entitled, What If We Get It Right? I, in sustainability, am not asking you to live in the cold and the dark, but I'm asking you to build a community, to work in a coalition, to deal with loneliness in the sense of how do we belong, to provide that mutual aid for each other at all scales. And it really actually does start locally and then build up. Pennsylvania is in a pivotal position to make a big difference just by what we do at all scales here. So I'll close with that. Appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, thanks for all your generous time today, all our panelists. And I hope that everyone online can join us for the rest of Sustainability Week. I'm going to turn it back to Matt to wrap it up, and I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Matt, are you there?
Thank you.